Manager, do you want to speak on the next issue?
Sure. Thanks, Mayor Council. I put on the agenda today just a brief update on the Land Development Code process, and that's really what I wanted to do is just a brief kind of heads up, if you will. We do have a few weeks until our next council meeting because of spring break and South by Southwest, but I have been, over the past several months, been listening to and working with a number of stakeholders and talking to all of you around the dais, and I can't put forward a broader process until I have some specific policy guidance from this council. And so staff is preparing a memo that will be released in the next 2 weeks, so sometime between now and the next council meeting. I will reserve time at that next work session to walk through that memo so you have a lot of clarity around what those topic areas, policy questions that I am asking for further clarification on. But from all the feedback that I received and from the discussions that I've had, I can't really move forward with any process recommendations until I have more specific guidance on some key areas. And I'll just highlight, parking would be another one of them, compatibility zones, density, and even the scope of the revision. So I'm going to tee up some of those key questions. They should be relatively straightforward, so both the council and the community can understand them, and then really be asking for that policy guidance before anything further is released to the public. So just wanted to give a heads up today that that's the next step in this process, is to put forward a memo asking for that policy guidance, and I look forward to that conversation at the end of the month.
Okay. Ann?
Thank you. Thank you very much, City Manager. A question, and you may not know the answer to that yet, but in terms of the memo that you'll be issuing, will you also cover the process for the council giving you the policy guidance? In other words, the process for the council to respond to the questions that you're raising in your memo?
Councilmember, absolutely. That's
Okay.
part of it, and certainly it's for consideration. I mean, I really want
sure.
to say here's a potential way to get that feedback.
Okay.
Some ideas, just to daylight them, would be a resolution. We could draft that resolution,
Okay.
but there would be specific questions that would say, you have to choose between option A or option B, or fill in a certain number in this area. But there would be a way for a formal vote.
Okay.
That would come back to staff so we could have some clear guidance on how to move forward.
Okay, and
but
then-
that would be one suggestion. If there are other ideas that are surfaced,
Okay.
we will obviously consider those.
Well, then I would just suggest that as part of the memo, as part of that process, that you also address the public's opportunity and process for providing input to us as we give input to you.
Great. Absolutely.
Kathy?
That's really the substance of my question as well. And let me say that I think that quick yes or no votes or direction votes on those issues is going to be really, would be challenging to have meaningful conversations. And so I hope when you come back with our memo, you'll kind of, as Councilmember Kitchen said, lay out a process where we have an opportunity to really dig into and explore those issues as we were starting to do in our work sessions, but also that we have substantial opportunity for our boards and commissions and our public to respond before we launch into another code revision.
Jimmy?
I'm really excited about this. I'm looking forward to receiving the memo. I think this is roughly what you're laying out is a great way to move forward, because we've got to not throw away all the work that we did over the last number of years. I think we got a lot of input from the community. I know I certainly did. We all held meetings in our districts. We all attended meetings in our districts. And I don't know that repeating all of that same conversation when the concerns are the same and the comments are the same, but at least in this case, we can say up front without having to dive so deep into a specific property or a specific policy or one page out of a 1,000-page document to say, generally, this is what we want to see, and these are the types of policies that we're ready to move forward on. So I'm incredibly excited and grateful, City Manager, to hear that this memo is going to be coming out, and I'm really excited to dive into this and to get things moving.
I'll just note for that, I mean, the purpose is also to make it very clear to the public about what those policy considerations are. So, the engagement, the work that has been, the feedback that has been given, but really making sure that any questions that are being considered by policymakers at this stage are very clear for hopefully everyone to understand and articulate, but just allows staff to have additional guidance as we move forward.
Okay. Leslie.
It seemed to me that one of the shortcomings of the Code Next process that we were engaged in for the last few years was our inability to get timely and accurate and comprehensive information out to the public so that they understood what we were doing, what the nuance was. And so to the extent that people ended up in different camps, I hope we don't end up in a place where that is repeated. We really need to be taking strong, concerted, combined, collegial steps here as a city to help lead the community through this revamp or reworking of the Land Development Code. And so I hope with the process that you're putting together, if you've had a backward look, I think that was part of the resolution to ask you to look for the areas in what we did previously where we fell short or where we succeeded, and that we can have a robust and nuanced conversation among ourselves without devolving into those camps again. And I certainly hope that, from my perspective, I'm able to bring folks who look to me for leadership in District 7 along on the conversation in ways that satisfies the questions that they have, even if it isn't giving them everything they want. All across the city, we have to be looking at this as a combined and fruitful discussion that we all move together. The pathway needs to be joined, I think. And that's a huge ask. But I think that I'm confident that you'll be able to bring us something that will give us the room to have those respectful and nuanced conversations, and then give good, complete information to people in the community who may only tune in every once in a while, and then may have a misapprehension of what we're trying to do or what we're actually going to do. Or they might be dead accurate on what it is we're trying to do, and then asking for our community, the folks in our residents, to help us with this advocacy and get to a place with the changes to the code that we're actually having planning, which I think is a huge piece that we need to focus on. We're planning for the future.
Yeah.
Thanks.
No, I appreciate that. And certainly the process that I've been undertaking over the last several months and listening to that feedback, reflecting on the last several years of this process, but then really moving at the speed of trust. And so why I'm not unveiling a big new process is because step one is this additional policy guidance from council. So that's the first thing that I need additional clarification on, and that's what I'll be bringing forward in this memo.
Okay. And I think that'll be helpful, and that makes sense to me, trying to gauge the temperature and readiness of the council to express those opinions, which could also be something that you inquire into. Are you ready to give an opinion on that? Ann?
One other thing that I'd suggest that wouldn't have to be as definitive, but I would suggest that in the memo where you talk about the process, that you also provide some information for the public about what would happen next. After we gave you, after you ended up with the council voting on the policy guidance, but just give the public some idea of what happens next. I know that you may not have specific timelines or that kind of thing, but I think that at least from some folks that I talked to, they'd like to understand the process from now until the end, and instead of just the process for this segment. So that to the extent that you can lay out a whole process, or at least some parameters around a whole process, that would be helpful, I think.
Okay. Anything else on this? Yes. Leslie.
Mayor, I have to go to an event, and so I will hopefully be back in time to come back. I think there's another luncheon happening. Is that right? And I have a different one that I have to go to, so I'm going to have to head out now.
I would imagine it's now 11:15. I think we're trying to get to the pulled items here, see if we can in 15 minutes. That would then is having the executive session. It has the Austin Energy item and then 3 personnel matters. We could then reconvene at, say, 1:10 and see if we could get through those 1:15. But let's see if we can get through this stuff now. Let's do the pulled items. I would like to, just real quickly, there was the handout that got handed out to council. We blew past pages in the last presentation, 5 and 6 real quickly, that showed the gap at 2.5%. The new information that was on this chart was even at a 5%. There's a real significant gap for us with our existing budget without adding anything new. And it's important to note that a 5% trigger on property tax revenue is not the same thing as a 5% trigger on general revenue. There are a lot of people that I've talked to that said government should be able to survive with a 5% increase in revenue. It's important to note that only half of our revenue comes from property tax. The rest of our revenue forecast to go up about 2%. So a 5% trigger for half of our revenue and 2% for the other half of the revenue means our revenue is only growing at 3.5%, and that's lower than our cost drivers. So even a 5% property tax trigger puts us below our cost drivers that we don't have control over, like health insurance and the like.